Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Pivoted Success podcast. I'm your co-host, Jared Goldsmith from eSAX. I'm also joined by our friend, Sean Cochran from TCC Canada. Hello, Sean. And our very first guest, Heather Petherick from Heather Petherick Coaching.
Hi there.
Hello, Heather. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, the purpose of this podcast is to hear from established, well-respected business owners and leaders in the community about how they have pivoted during COVID, sharing some of their stories, some nuggets, some words of wisdom to help inspire other people.
Awesome.
Heather, thank you so much. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, Heather? How did you become a successful businesswoman?
Well, I'll try to keep it short. So I started into coaching. I hung my shingle out as a coach way back before pandemics were a thing. That was back in 2007. And so really for the last 13 years have been navigating self-employment, entrepreneurialism, and the coaching realm. My business is predominantly online. Some of my VIP clients pre-COVID, we would, sometimes meet, and we'll talk about that later.
So you've been using the online resources for years, way prior to COVID.
Yeah, thank God for the internet. It has really been able to, it's blown my business. It's always just been my business, right? Online. That's how I always connect with my community, prospects, and clients. So yeah, big fan.
Great. And why did you decide to go virtual all those years ago?
That is a great question. It was an intentional decision because at the time when I started my business, I lived in a relatively small urban center. It was less than 100,000 people. And my specialty was such that my ideal clients were far and few between in that community. If I was going to have a business, I needed a wider reach, a broader, more visibility. And so it was just a natural that if I was going to do business, it had to be online. So right from the get-go, I had to get up to speed with all things virtual. Now, at the time, I think Skype was the only visual online medium we had. And so when I first started, all of my clients, we didn't have the visual component. We just did audio calls. So things have gotten better and better over time.
Are you finding that now, because the whole world is virtual, that somebody like you who's been around for a long time, people are coming to you for knowledge on how to adapt and pivot their business models, or perhaps?
I wouldn't say they're seeking me out for that. My specialty is really around mastering sales and high ticket one-to-one sales conversations. That's what I've become known for. But what my clients will often remark is just the ease at which and the possibilities of online client relationships. Because I often forget, Jared, that not everybody does all of their business online because it's just how I've been operating for over a decade. But one of the things I'm very passionate about and what this pandemic has brought to light is how we can really serve our clients even through a virtual forum. And what I think there used to be a stronger bias that, we can't have great client relationships or service delivery unless we're, boots on the ground, face to face across the same table. And the pandemic, I think, is proving to some of us, even reluctantly, that that's not the case.
Right.
Heather, I just had a quick question going back to the technology side. You mentioned you sort of started with Skype and moved on from there. But before the pandemic hit, were you a Zoom person, or what was your sort of medium of choice?
Man, I like to say that I was Zooming long before it was cool. Yeah, Zooming, or if back when Zoom was kind of just getting going and the connections were sometimes more shaky than they are now, our backup was FaceTime or Skype if we really had to.
Yeah. Oh, great. So for you, with all the pandemic obviously is a big shift, but before the pandemic, did you have a hard time with some of your incoming clients with the virtual aspect of the business rather than a sort of face-to-face expectation that a lot of people might have in that sort of typical scenario?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, but there's particularly for coaching, there's there's more ease there. It seems to be like coaching has been online earlier than some other industries. And so there's just a level of comfort and almost an expectation that it's going to be virtual. But even with that, the pandemic has forced me to change my own business. So we could talk about that. Did I answer your question, Sean?
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. So tell us a little bit more about you, your business, and what you do in terms of coaching, because we hear coaching used often as a term that's fairly broad. So
yeah, I mean, there's any problem, any human problem in the world, I'm sure you could find a coach for it, right? So the type of coach that I am is I specialize in working with service-based entrepreneurs, business owners, to help them sell out their high ticket offers consistently and elegantly without ever using an ounce of sleaze, right? That's one of the things I'm most passionate about, is helping my clients learn how to really have elegant, authentic, and effective sales conversations in a virtual setting. I mean, obviously it works if we ever have the luxury of meeting face-to-face again, but it's really easy to do that in a virtual setting as well. So it's helping them consistently sell out those high ticket offers without being a salesy, you know what. I'll keep it clean.
You know, I love that. As soon as you said sleazy, like for some reason it just caught my attention because it's so different than what you normally hear, especially as a coach. I can relate from networking. Most people think networking is this sleazy, slimy, just trying to get a sale, throwing a business card out.
Yeah.
And it's how you approach people. It's that being genuine.
Yeah, this is one of the things I love most about you, Jared, and Sean, and the community that you build, because it's truly, we are the same mind in that the best business is built on authentic relationships, real connection and conversation. That's where it's got to start. And that's really, what I teach, is how to do that in sales.
Right. And how did you get into coaching in the first place? Like when you started, did you have coaches yourself and you said, I can do this a little bit differently or better than others? Like, why did you want to become an entrepreneur way back when?
That's a funny story, one that we should probably have drinks over, but I'll keep it short. I was a very good student, naturally intelligent, excelled in university, but spent so much time studying and doing what, parents and mentors said I should do, that when I finally did get out of school, it was recruited with the world's largest privately held company. I mean, I really thought, the red carpet, my destiny is just unfolding as they foretold, and realized about 4 weeks into this new job, I absolutely hated it. And I had a heap of student debt. And I ended up very quickly quitting my lucrative grad job with no prospects, didn't even qualify for EI. And I needed to do a serious career U-turn and figure out, okay, if it's not this, what the heck am I going to do? And so I actually hired a career coach at the time. In fact, at that time, back in the early 2000s, coaching was mostly, when you said coach, people thought you were a soccer player, right? Or an athletic instructor. And so at the time, one of the forerunners in coaching was Franklin Covey, right? A personal development company. And so I hired one of their coaches and fell in love with the process of powerful questioning, inviting someone to their own awareness and igniting that possibility for themselves. And I thought, holy cow, if I could do that as a job, that would be a riot. And so that's where it all started.
That's fabulous. You know what they say, when you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
So it's so true.
That's great, Heather. How were you and the Heather Petherick coaching business affected by COVID?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about here today, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you hear that so many small businesses are suffering, and that's one of the reasons Sean and I collaborated to get this off the ground, this podcast, was we hear so many people are holding on to their purse strings. They're afraid. They're cutting spending. For people who pay to improve their businesses, but everybody's holding back. How have you been affected?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to share that in 2020, my business, my income we lost about 40% of our expected revenues. And I'll tell you why. At the time, there were two main streams of income in my business. One was a high ticket year-long mastermind program. And part of the allure of joining that program is that we had 3 luxury in-person retreats every year for a group of service-based business owners. And, if there's anything you need to know about me is I tend to like to do things with a sense of style. And so they were fairly luxurious in exotic places. And it was just a fabulous experience for clients. Well, when the pandemic hit, obviously all of that got shut down. And so we parked that stream of income for the entire year of 2020. It's still on ice because we aren't confident in being able to travel and still assure people's safety. Even the regulations, can't even get into a different country.
I mean, we're not talking like the Gatineau Hills. We're talking about somewhere like really extensive.
That's right. Like, take your passport, get on a plane. It's going to be a while.
Very cool.
Yeah, really like places that you would never otherwise find yourself. Like, it was really and there's a reason we do that is because when you get yourself in an elevated environment, it opens up a whole nother level and type of thinking for a business owner, right? You get out of your day-to-day trenches and you start to see your life, the way that you operate in a completely different way. And it's a perfect catalyst for, going to the next level in your business. Anyway, all of that had to be put on ice in 2020, still is. And so we lost 40% of our expected revenues last year. But here's the silver lining. I wasn't traveling. I didn't have the expenses of getting on a plane, reserving, lovely places for our guests or our clients. And it forced me to double down on what I could do and what I knew I could do well, which is the second, and continues to be right now. It was a secondary line of income. Now it has become, due to COVID, our primary line of income, which is a mastermind, but it's exclusively held virtually, right? So every Thursday afternoon, just before I'm talking to you, I'm talking to a group of our entrepreneurs from around the globe. So the pandemic has really provided us an opportunity to perfect the delivery and the filling of that online program in a way that we never would have had the opportunity before.
Have you seen more interest since the pandemic from people? I mean, I guess your market is worldwide already, but have you seen more interest from other countries and things like that with everybody sort of trapped at home?
I'll tell you what, there's two things that have worked in our favor with the pandemic. One is people they have no option now of in-person coaching. And so if maybe they wanted to up-level their investment to have that one-on-one, now they're looking exclusively online for online programs. But the other thing is that we continue to see, because of the exchange rates, a lot of our clients are coming from the US and the UK and Australia because the Canadian dollar is so attractive to them.
Yeah, sad for Canada, really, but also great for Canada because then it brings in more money from the other countries that are like, wow, dirt cheap. Great.
Yeah, what a deal.
And so, Heather, how are you helping? I mean, without getting into a coaching session with us here, how are you helping to advise your clients, like things they could do to still stay in business? Like, I know you deal with a wide variety of industries and genres of businesses, but are there any overall lessons that you might?
Well, before I get to that, I do want to make sure I share something, Jared. So hold that thought. But what I want to share around what happened when the pandemic first hit, like all business owners, I was like, oh my gosh, like there was a moment where I think we all had a freak out, and it depends on how long we stayed in that mode. But I remember wondering, because my program, it's called Sales Mastery, right? It's mastering your one-to-one high-ticket sales conversations for those authentic business owners. I thought, oh my gosh, like the first thing people are going to pull the plug on in cutting expenses is coaching, right? Like, maybe this is the end of my business. But what I actually found, and what has really impressed me, is that for the business owners and entrepreneurs who are serious about what they're doing, it was a wake up call for them to get serious about mastering their sales conversations, because the pandemic has shared or has woken us up to this fact that we can no longer be casual about our sales. We can no longer tolerate sales conversations that don't turn out favorably, right? We have to be much better at inviting people more consistently and making it count when we do have those conversations. So what we actually found was the reverse of our fears. Where I thought business would dry up, we actually got a higher quality type of client and more of them, because they realized, if I'm going to survive, I got to figure out the sales process. Whereas before, I think because of the abundance and the activity in the marketplace, they could ignore sales and, put on a Band-Aid of paid advertising or other marketing activities, and to some degree ignore that actual sales conversation, and make it up in other ways. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's something I definitely want to share, is that, even as a coach, I had my own fears around what is this pandemic going to do to our business? And it actually, the reality of it, while we lost 40% of our revenues last year temporarily, we're seeing that come back even stronger because we've perfected this other line of income.
Well, I'm from the other extreme, Heather. As you know, I'm a full-time musician and
Yeah.
an in-person event planner hosting events for others. 100% decrease overnight.
Yeah.
There's no going back to music. I don't even know if I'm going to go back to playing. But all I can say is I had to do some deep thinking back in March 2020. And I realized shortly after that what I've been doing was mostly a labor of love. It wasn't really much of a business model, besides bringing together community, which is worthwhile, but it never really paid the bills. But now I'm realizing, much like you are, that, it's get off the pot type of thing. Yeah. And if you don't, then what's going to happen to your business?
Yeah. One of the things I love having this conversation because it forces me to even take stock of what has actually happened in my business. And one of the things I want to take personal credit for, so thanks for giving me a channel to do this, is that it inspired me to remove any element of excess, right? So that on paper, in 2020, we actually were more profitable than we had ever been in 13 years of business because we got rid of anything that was non-essential.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. And it's a sobering, as you say, it's a sobering lesson. And yeah, it's going to serve to improve our business moving forward for sure.
It's been a wild experience, that's for sure. And I remember back in March, everybody was the same, but you're just like, okay, so they've shut down the world. I guess I just sit here and wait and then things will get better. But you quickly realize that if you're going to just sit there and wait, you'll be out of business in no time. So It's hard to sort of shake off the insanity that's going on around you, to just get back in gear and say, you know what, I can go this angle with what I've got right now because all of this is gone. Yeah. Or I sit here with nothing to do, which is awful.
That's right. But isn't that one of the great things about business is that we're like, whether it's a pandemic or some other economic downturn, that there's always going to be some challenge that threatens to shake us at our core. And it invites us to really look at, what is it that I love? How can I make a living at this? And what do I need to do in order to do that? Like, I call them those coming to Jesus moments, right?
That's absolutely true. One of the defining traits, I think, if you were to poll thousands of entrepreneurs, big entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, the first thing that they would come across would be they're go-getters. They're not one to sit on their high knees and wait for the world to give them handouts.
Yeah.
Those who are probably don't stay in business too long. They might be business owners, but not entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Now, for those of us who are making a difference and doing things and adjusting on the fly, I mean, it's much easier if you're a small solopreneur, rather than, say a 40, 50 person business.
Right.
But having that vision on being able to adapt and pivot is, I don't know if they teach that in entrepreneurship schools.
Yeah. And I think for me, a lot of it comes down to, and this has been learned over time, is that there's a muscle that you develop, which is not taking any of the business elements too personal. I've seen a lot of business owners who have fantastic services, fantastic products, let the pandemic affect them personally. Like they felt like they did something wrong or they weren't good enough. And that's why they haven't succeeded. And I think that's a tragedy. There's going to be challenges no matter what business we're in. But we can't take those challenges personally. We have to find a way, right? It's not a matter of if we're going to survive, it's how. How are we going to survive?
That's another interesting point. It opens up the whole idea of mental health for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's not the purpose of our podcast today, but it's such a huge issue that everybody has to deal with.
Yeah. it's humbling,
Yeah.
but there's always something we can do as entrepreneurs to serve our market, create products, make an impact, right? There's
Or
always
give up. I've seen so many stories now that have had people finally look at their business with the real eyes, not the entrepreneur's eyes. And I'm
Yeah.
guilty of that constantly, is to just see it in reality. And you're like, even in good times, this is not what I should be doing. I need to pivot or change or give up on this idea and move to something else, because it's given people a new lens to sort of look through, because you didn't have a choice. I mean, it was just forced upon you, right? And I mean, in, I don't know, 15 years in business for myself, I've never experienced anything even close to this. We've been through recessions and other things, and you're like, okay, these are bad, but it's just, wow, this is bad. And it really helps you sort of look at things again and just be like, okay, well, this is just superfluous crap that I don't need and I'm paying for no reason. What am I doing? Let's focus on the areas that make the most difference.
Yeah, such a good point, Sean. It is a sobering look in the mirror, right? That's what the pandemic has done.
Yeah, and like you realized from the very beginning, Heather, it's cutting out the excess. And I think we all have. I mean, I'm not even though I live in Ottawa, I'm not driving probably 5 or 10 hours a day in traffic, a week rather, from going to different events.
Yeah.
I'm much more, probably all of us are realizing we're much more productive, because now we're just going from one meeting to the other. Like if I had a meeting in Canada, I live in Orleans, I would leave 2 hours so I would avoid rush hour, and I'd be sitting there just on my phone doing meetings. Like, it's being much more cautious of our time.
Yes, and more discerning with what resources we do have left.
Yeah,
right?
And that's why I think.
Making sure we get an ROI out of every dollar we have.
I mean, this is probably going to come up quite often, but where do you think the future is going to go for virtual events? Do you think there will always be hybrids from now on? Do you put your crystal ball on? And
I do think so if I had a crystal ball, and this is just me talking, but I think there will be a much greater uptick of virtual events in the future, because the pandemic has forced us to get comfortable with this format, right? Whatever technology phobias we had before or biases against it, I think the pandemic is as it drags on, it continues to prove to us that there are other ways, there are other means. So I think what I see is that major conferences, when the pandemic is over, and it will end eventually, well, there will be a return to live conferences in the traditional format. I think there'll be a virtual stream for those traditional conferences that actually increases the viewership and attendance overall. So where some members may want the luxury and up-level their investment to have that precious in-person experience, I think there will always be that element. I think it opens up the opportunity for people, for whatever reason, choose not to travel or maybe couldn't in the past, will now come to those conferences and be able to access that experience in a different container. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what I love about it too, is just opening up that virtual side, because I mean, obviously an in-person conference experience is something special, and it's hard to replace that. But for the people that can't afford, say, $5,000 to fly across the country or wherever, to come and experience that, and they can experience it still from a virtual perspective at a sort of more reasonable rate without having to pay for the hotel, the flight, and all the rest of it. But it's more inclusive because it can include all of these people in different countries and different areas that would never have been able to make it otherwise. So it can really sort of broaden the reach of any of your events, which I think is pretty exciting for a lot of these people sort of long term, with this sort of creation of whatever the hybrid is going to be sort of on the other side of this.
Yes, hybrid is the perfect word there, Sean. I think I would like to see all events have that hybrid stream going forward.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's always going to be a need for the face-to-face, and especially when you have your fancy retreats, Heather. I mean, put me on your mailing list. Maybe one day I'll be able to attend in the future.
Oh, Sean, we would have so much fun.
But yeah, it is opening up a whole new realm for people who might not have otherwise had the chance to connect. And I deal with people, event planners, all day who are looking for alternatives. And they would say, I would have a 4-day conference at a hotel in Vegas, and it cost us $95,000 US to put on.
Yeah.
and now they could do it for a fraction of that cost and have higher attendance. It's such a game changer.
It is. Here's one cool thing, and I just have to talk about this because I think it's something about the hybrid format of an event that I hadn't anticipated. But I'm starting to see this crop up as an entrepreneurial opportunity of small businesses actually providing like an experiential kit to be delivered to the virtual attendees. And it is like awesome. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Well, I
love it.
Oh, sorry, Sean.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I love that. There was I think it was called Social at Home conference that they did, and they mailed out little packages to every single attendee so that when you started it, you had something to open and interact with. And it was such a good experience because I think that little extra, even if it costs a bit more, is worth it because then you still have that interaction. So it feels a little bit more inclusive that you're really involved rather than just watching it on a screen, right?
Yeah. And it gives something virtual tangibility.
Yeah, I was doing a virtual conference for this large organization in the States, and it was a fancy gala. You know, you'd have a hotel and like a 5-course meal, and they pre-ordered options for people with a tablecloth and a candle, and everybody at one point was sitting here eating, and it was lovely. You saw the nice tall candle next to them, and they were commenting. They feel like they were at a gala.
Yeah,
it was
very cool.
Very, very good.
I love all the little ideas and just added things that people are coming up with to try and make it feel a bit more normal. And one of my favorite questions I hear all the time is, so when do you think we're going to go back to normal? And I was like, what normal? I was like, we've broken everything now. So, I mean, there's no like just flipping the switch and it going back to normal, I don't think. I mean, obviously on the other side of this pandemic, things will get more normal in a day-to-day sense. But I mean, I don't think you're going to be able to turn off this new work from home, work from anywhere, the sort of experience that everybody's had that for the most part has been relatively positive. And I mean, obviously there's exceptions to every single rule. I mean, if you've got screaming kids around your head all day, I mean, that's not great, stuff like that. But I mean, it's really awoken people to what's possible from a virtual sort of remote working environment. Yeah,
I agree. 100%.
So Heather, what does the future hold for you and Heather Petherick coaching?
What does the future hold? Oh,
I mean, this is a bit different from your crystal ball because now you're actually not imagining how things are going to go. You're going to do it, let's say in 6 months or a year from now.
Yeah. Well, continuing on with what we have learned, right? The sobering straight look in the mirror that the pandemic has served up, removing anything superfluous, what a great word, Sean, from our business and really taking a hard look at profitability. We are continuing to crack the code and perfect the delivery of our online virtual sales mastery course that's going to continue to grow. And it's really about consistency in business for me. It's around really figuring out what levers to pull, what dials to push to make sure that we're filling that program in a consistent way, and also delivering a really standout experience. So that's where our focus remains for 2021 because we're still in the pandemic. There's no green light for travel yet. But don't kid yourself. I have a long list of locations that I have been scoping out for the last, what has it been now, a year, that we're going to be looking at executing whenever we're allowed to travel again. And anything else, I'm really excited about just doing things masterfully, right? Doing things with real intention, right? Where we're spending our time and our resources, how we're serving our clients, how we're connecting. And the pandemic, you know, as much as it's been frustrating and disappointing and devastating for some, it is also, I have some affection for the fact that it is, I think, given me a lot more maturity in business around dealing with challenges, finding ways to pivot, focusing on what's working, not letting the other things get me down, and continue to move forward.
What I love about the outlook for a lot of people now is if you're sort of on, I mean, I don't want to say the pandemic's over by any means, obviously, but we're getting to the sort of last half of it is what I'd like to sort of think of.
Right.
In the sense that we're going to be, exactly, we're going to be getting vaccinated, things are going to get safer and all that sort of stuff. I find it's just scary to think if you've managed to get through this, to think that there's going to be much worse coming at you in the future. Because I think if you can deal with this hurdle, I think you've sort of set yourself up for resilience when it comes to what's coming at you next, because you know what the worst sort of case scenario is coming at you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I may, Jared, a little shameless self-promotion, may I?
Mastery. It's mastery, Heather.
Yes. Here's one of the things I'm most excited about for my clients is, regardless of how long this pandemic lasts or where they emerge once it's over, is I am so lit up about supporting them to master their sales skills, because however their offers evolve or however their business changes, even if they have to close up shop and do something different, sales mastery never goes out of style. The ability to connect authentically and serve prospects and invite them to do business, no pandemic is going to erase the need for that skill. So that's in itself a business resiliency skill that I want all of us to have.
Definitely. Well, and it's such an amazing skill to have, and something, like you said, you'd need in any job almost if you were doing any sort of sales of any kind. Because, I mean, that's a skill that will follow you from industry to industry, to product, whatever it is. But that skill and that art, if you will, is something that it takes a long time to develop. And really honing in on that is so important for any business. So,
yeah. I love everything you said there, Sean, except for it takes a long time. You come in the program, 10 weeks later, baby, we turn you around. You're like the Darth Vader or the Yoda of sales conversations.
Heather, what about words of wisdom for others? Let's say those who are on the cusp. I mean, I'm not just talking mental health, although maybe we should do a podcast about that, Sean, at one point. But like, who are like, you know what, business hasn't been that profitable for years. Now I am re-examining, like you've said, you know, the hard issues. And now, you know, what do? Do I pull the plug after my heart and soul and, you know, my mortgage, everything went into it? Do I start over? Do I try to reinvigorate it? Like, what about words of wisdom for people who are like, I don't know?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Tough question, Jared. Wow. Way to stump a girl. Words of wisdom. Words of wisdom. Do you know what? I think it's important that nobody can make, you know, I can say what I would do, but it's not true for everyone. I think everybody has to, at the end of the day, make the decision that's right for them and their families. If that means closing up a business that you've poured your, you know, a passionate business that you've poured your heart and soul into for a decade, if it means that you need to close up shop and have a gap job, do something else to pay the bills in the interim, then that's the right decision, right? There is no right or wrong. If you have the resources and the luxury to you know, keep on going and fight the good fight so that we can get to the other side of this pandemic, then that's the right decision. As a coach, I am reluctant to label anything as right or wrong, because only you can make that decision. For me, I know that if I had to get another job, I would, and I would do so that I could support my family. I have the luxury of having some creative ideas and a way to offer my services virtually that shields me from some of these pandemic effects. But I know at the end of the day, even if I had to get a gap job, I would be coming back pretty darn quick to that entrepreneurial lifestyle, because that is who I am.
I love talking to you, Heather, because you have such a sense of energy and enthusiasm. And I know what separates the good coach, or I have an idea rather, of what separates the good coaches from mediocre ones. It's those who are like, here's what you should be doing to fix it. No. Here are some great suggestions to help you, which you might find useful. And it's up to your clients to realize for themselves what's best for them.
Yeah, so good. I often say, if I've helped my client realize their own truth, I've done my job.
Well, it's funny, when me and Jared were first talking about doing this podcast, it was because he was posting online about his new virtual event business and how it was doing well, and how after the pandemic, it was really picking up. But he felt guilty about it because everybody's in this awful situation. People are losing their businesses, their homes, God knows what. So it's really hard for anybody to really comfortably come out and say, I'm doing really great. But it's so important for us to share those stories because it's really depressing. All the stuff you read in the news, all the rest of it, and you hear entrepreneur after entrepreneur being like, I have done this for 20 years. I've done everything right. And now I'm out of business. I don't understand. How could I have done anything differently? And maybe you couldn't. But it's just so nice to hear stories of positivity and just that A, things are starting to change, but B, there's a life beyond this pandemic and happiness and success. So it's just so hard to not get sort of bogged down in the depressing reality of what we're in right now. Especially when you see just walking down the streets, stores shuttered and things like that. It's very depressing. And you know, each one of those closed stores is somebody's lifeblood and somebody's passion and all that sort of stuff that's just been extinguished essentially. So it's just so nice to hear some positivity and some good stories around what people have been able to do to make this work.
Yeah, so good. One thing I want to touch on that you've inspired here, Sean, is this idea, and this is around mental health. And as entrepreneurs and as small business owners, when we have created this a business out of our own creativity, resilience, and grit, while that's great, it also comes at the cost because so often we attach our sense of identity and worth to that business. And when the business does not go well because of things like a pandemic that we have no control over, it can impact our, we start to feel like a steaming pile of what. And that's not fair. That's not fair to ourselves. So even if the business expires, it doesn't mean the end of you because there's always another iteration of who we are, always.
Yeah, it's tough to be able to sort of pivot and reinvent yourself without feeling like you've lost or you've been defeated. But I mean, as an entrepreneur, I mean, it's very rare that you're going to just succeed right from the beginning and off you go, right? There's a lot of ups and downs and a bunch of times where you're like, I've made a mistake. I need to get out of this, or this isn't working, or whatever, right? Because there's a lot of self-doubt, especially in the sort of solopreneur world. And it's something I take for granted as an entrepreneur. It's just the sort of mindset I have. But speaking with my wife, who's a teacher, when all this started, she was just like, you've worked so hard for this business, and it just doesn't seem fair that all of a sudden there's going to be no office and nobody's ever going to go back and all this stuff. And you've just done all that for nothing. I was like, well, there's nothing gained, nothing lost, nothing gained, right? So, I mean, it's one of those situations that, I mean, yes, you might have put your heart and soul into it, but maybe it's not a viable business anymore. So switch your mode and do something else, and you'll have downtimes. Maybe you have to take a bridge job or whatever just to sort of get you through so that you can support your family. But I mean, for most of us in that sort of mindset, it's an addiction almost that you need to go back to because you're just passionate about things, right? So
yeah, being in business for self and running a business, it is a deeply humbling experience.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide. Everything you do can be scrutinized, and it affects your bottom line in many cases. Yeah. Most entrepreneurs, we call successful entrepreneurs because they might have gotten bought out of their business after X amount of years. How many businesses did it take them to fail to get where they were?
Yeah, right.
So I think the pandemic, I mean, putting my positivity hat on, I'm a optimistic person by nature, is it could be a blessing for a lot of businesses too. Like you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, Heather, is to sit down and re-examine, what's worked and cull the fat and move.
Well, and I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's going to give them that push that they needed in a negative way, of course. But if you've been struggling for 5+ years in your business, you're not really making money, you're killing yourself just trying to make it work, and it just isn't, well, maybe this is that sort of swan song to be like, this is not the right business. I need to do something else. This just doesn't make sense anymore.
And wouldn't it be great if we could use the pandemic as a socially acceptable reason to elegantly check out if it's not great?
Absolutely. Now's the time for that, for bigger changes. Well, look, we're getting to the end of our time. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up for today, Heather?
I love both of you. I think this is a fantastic idea. I love having been your first guest. And when can we do it again?
Fantastic. Well, Heather Petherick from Heather Petherick Coaching, thank you so much for joining Sean Cochran from TCC Canada and myself, Jared Goldsmith from eSAX, on our very first episode of the Pivoted Success podcast. We wish you all the best during COVID and long after.